The tale begins in a sleepy college town, tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place where mist clings to the ground every morning, wrapping the campus in an eerie embrace. It was late October, and the university was buzzing with midterm stress and the anticipation of Halloween parties. Among the students was Claire, a diligent biology major, who often stayed late in the library to study. The library, an imposing Gothic structure with towering spires and stained glass windows, had its own unsettling reputation. Stories whispered about shadows that moved when no one else was around, the faint sound of a child crying in the basement archives, and the infamous phantom of room 406. Claire brushed off these tales as silly urban legends. She was too rational, too focused on her studies, to entertain such nonsense. One night, as the clock struck 11:30 p.m., Claire realized she was the last student in the library. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the only sounds were the rustling of her notes and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. She was deep into her microbiology textbook when she noticed the air had grown uncomfortably cold. Shivering, she pulled her sweater tighter around her and glanced at the nearby thermostat. It read a normal 7 degrees Fahrenheit. She frowned but shrugged it off. Moments later, she heard a faint tapping sound. It was slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere above her. Claire glanced up, scanning the dimly lit rafters, but saw nothing. She shook her head, convincing herself it was just the old building settling. But then the tapping grew louder, closer. It seemed to echo in her ears, a rhythmic beat that sent chills down her spine. "Just the wind," she muttered, trying to steady her breathing. Yet, as she packed her bag to leave, the sound stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening. She froze, feeling the weight of an unseen presence. Slowly, she turned her head toward the staircase leading to the upper floors. The faint glow of the emergency exit sign illuminated a figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was a woman, pale and gaunt, wearing a tattered white dress that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, and her hollow eyes locked onto Claire. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs refused to move. The woman raised a hand, her bony finger pointing directly at Claire. Then she opened her mouth, and an ear-piercing scream filled the library. Claire snapped out of her paralysis and bolted for the door, her heart pounding. She didn't stop running until she was safely back in her dorm room. She tried to convince herself it was a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But that night, her dreams were plagued by the woman's face, those empty eyes burning into her soul. The next morning, Claire hesitantly shared her experience with her roommate, Jessica. Jessica's face paled as Claire described the woman. "That sounds like Eleanor," Jessica whispered. "She was a student here in the 1950s. They say she went missing after spending the night studying in the library. Her body was never found." Claire's blood ran cold, but she wasn't convinced. Determined to put the matter to rest, she decided to return to the library during the day to investigate. She found herself drawn to room 406, where the so-called phantom was said to linger. The room was small and cramped, filled with dusty shelves and outdated reference books. As she scanned the room, her eyes fell on a leather-bound journal tucked between two volumes. The journal belonged to Eleanor. Its pages detailed her final days, filled with strange occurrences, cold drafts, whispering voices, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The last entry sent shivers down Claire's spine. "I think it's found me. If anyone reads this, beware the shadows. They are alive." Claire slammed the journal shut, her hands trembling. Just then, she heard the tapping again. It was louder now, echoing from the hallway. She turned toward the sound, and there, standing in the doorway, was the woman. Her expression twisted into a sinister grin. This time, Claire didn't make it out. Her body was discovered 3 days later, slumped over a desk in room 406, her face frozen in a mask of terror. Her friends swore she'd been studying in her dorm, but the library's security cameras told a different story. Claire had entered the building that night, but she was never seen leaving. Now students avoid the library after dark, especially room 406. But late at night, when the campus is silent and the wind howls through the trees, you can still hear the tapping and sometimes the faint sound.
Story number 2.
Here's another chilling tale to set your spine tingling. It was the end of fall semester at Pine Ridge University, and Megan, a senior art major, had taken up a unique final project, painting a mural in one of the abandoned buildings on campus. The old science hall, shut down decades ago due to a mysterious fire, had been granted to the art department for use in projects. Megan thought it would be the perfect setting for her work, moody, atmospheric, and rich with history. The building had a strange energy, even during the day. Its charred walls bore the scars of the fire, and a faint smell of burnt wood lingered in the air. Students whispered about how the fire had trapped a professor and several students during an experiment gone wrong, though no one knew for sure what had caused it. Megan brushed off the stories, focused on her mural. She set up her paints and began working late into the evenings, loving the solitude. But the solitude came with its own costs. On her third night, she noticed faint footprints in the dust on the floor, a child's footprints. Thinking some prankster had snuck in, she ignored them. The next night, the footprints appeared again, but this time they were closer to her workspace. She laughed nervously to herself. Probably just old marks I didn't notice before. Then came the whispers. Soft, indecipherable voices seemed to float through the air as she worked. She paused, turning off her music to listen. The room fell silent. "Great, now I'm imagining things," she muttered, shaking her head. On the fifth night, as Megan painted alone under a dim work lamp, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. It was raspy and shallow, like someone struggling for air. She froze, her brush poised mid-stroke, and scanned the room. Shadows danced on the walls, but there was no one there. "It's just the wind," she whispered to herself, though she could feel her heart pounding. Suddenly, the breathing turned into a low, guttural moan. Megan spun around, her eyes darting to the far corner of the room. That's when she saw it, a figure hunched over, its back to her. It looked vaguely human, but horribly distorted, its limbs too long, its spine bent at an unnatural angle. The thing was covered in dark, charred skin, and it twitched as if struggling to move. Megan gasped, stumbling backward, her paintbrush clattering to the floor. The figure slowly turned its head toward her, its face a grotesque blend of melted flesh and hollow sockets where eyes should have been. It opened its mouth to scream, but no sound came out, only the hiss of air escaping like a deflating balloon. Panicking, Megan grabbed her flashlight and aimed it at the figure. In the harsh beam of light, it vanished, leaving nothing but a faint scorch mark on the wall. Trembling, she packed up her supplies and fled the building, vowing never to return. The next day, Megan told her professor what had happened. He sighed and shook his head. "You're not the first student to report something like that," he admitted. "That building, it's tied to the fire, you know. They never recovered all the bodies. Some say the spirits of those who died there never left." Megan refused to finish her project, and the science hall was officially closed off to all students after that. But the mural she started still remains, unfinished, hidden behind a locked door. Occasionally, brave students who sneak into the building swear they hear faint whispers and the sound of raspy breathing, as though someone or something is watching them. If you're ever at Pine Ridge University and you pass by the old science hall, don't linger too long. You might hear it too, the moan of the charred figure, still searching for release from its eternal torment.
Story number 3.
Here's a third terrifying story. The legend of the roommate's note was a tale every freshman at Blackwood College heard during orientation week. Some called it an urban myth. Others swore it was true. It went like this. If you ever left a note for your roommate warning them not to look under the bed while you were out, something horrible would happen if they disobeyed. Samantha had heard the story and laughed it off. She didn't believe in ghost stories or campus superstitions. But one night, as she was studying late, her roommate Lily came back to their dorm looking pale and frazzled. Lily grabbed her things, muttering about needing to crash at her boyfriend's place, and left in a hurry. The next morning, Samantha woke to find a note pinned to her desk. It was written in Lily's handwriting and read, "Whatever you do, don't look under the bed." At first, Samantha thought it was a prank. She rolled her eyes and went about her day. By evening, she was alone in the dorm, her textbooks scattered on the bed as she tried to focus, but the note kept nagging at her. Why would Lily write that? Was it part of the story she'd heard? As the hours crept by, Samantha began to feel uneasy. The room felt colder than usual, and strange creaking sounds came from beneath the floor. She shook her head, muttering to herself, "This is stupid. I'm not scared." But the unease grew stronger. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. She leaned over the side of her bed and peered into the darkness below. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw her roommate, Lily, or at least someone who looked like Lily. She was lying perfectly still, her eyes wide open, staring at Samantha. "Lily?" Samantha whispered, her voice trembling. The figure below smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide, teeth too sharp. "Samantha," it rasped, its voice low and distorted. "Why didn't you listen?" Samantha screamed, scrambling off the bed. As she did, the figure darted out from underneath with inhuman speed. The last thing she saw before her world went black was its twisted face lunging toward her. When campus security found Samantha the next day, she was curled in a corner of the room, muttering incoherently. Lily was never seen again, though some say her name still appears on dorm rosters for room 214. Students who stay there claim to hear faint laughter from under their beds at night. And if you ever leave a note for your roommate warning them not to look under the bed, well, you'd better hope they live.
Story number 4.
Here's another bone-chilling story to keep you up at night. Maya was a junior at Rosewood University, and she had just moved into the top floor of Marshall Hall, the oldest dorm on campus. The building had a history: fires, mysterious deaths, and even an unsolved disappearance. Maya didn't believe in ghosts or curses, so she shrugged off the warnings from her friends about staying there. She liked the old architecture, the creaky wood floors, and the view of the sprawling campus from her window. The strange occurrences began the first night. Maya was unpacking when she noticed scratches on the inside of her closet door. Long, jagged marks like someone or something had been clawing at the wood. Thinking it was just wear and tear from years of use, she ignored it. But when she went to bed, the scratching started again, this time from the inside of the closet. At first, she thought it was mice. She banged on the door, but the noise stopped. Satisfied, she turned off the light and tried to sleep. Hours later, she woke with a start. Her room was icy cold, and the air felt heavy. She glanced at the closet door and saw it was slightly ajar, even though she shut it tightly before bed. Maya got up, heart pounding, and pushed the door closed. She told herself it was just the old building settling, nothing more. But as the nights passed, the disturbances grew worse. Footsteps echoed outside her door while, even though she was alone on the floor, whispers, faint but persistent, seemed to come from the walls themselves. Once, she woke up to find her desk chair facing her bed, even though she'd left it tucked under the desk. The breaking point came one stormy night. Lightning lit up the sky, casting eerie shadows across her room. She was lying in bed, listening to the rain, when she heard it, a low, guttural voice calling her name. "Maya!" She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The voice came again, this time closer. "Maya! Let me in!" Terrified, she grabbed her phone to turn on the flashlight. As the beam illuminated the room, she saw it, a figure standing in the corner. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its face hidden in shadow. It tilted its head, and she could feel its gaze pierce through her. The closet door creaked open. Maya screamed and bolted for the hallway, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut. Behind her, she heard the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor, getting closer. She pounded on the door, screaming for help, when suddenly the lights flickered on and the door swung open. Her RA stood there, wide-eyed. "What's going on?" she asked, looking past Maya into the room. But when they both stepped back inside, the figure was gone. The closet door hung open, and inside was nothing but Maya's clothes. She moved out the next day, refusing to stay another night. The dorm room was sealed off shortly after, but students still talk about Marshall Hall. They say if you walk by late at night, you can hear someone whispering your name. And if you're brave enough to peek through the keyhole of room 504, you might see a pair of glowing eyes staring back